So now in this lecture, we're going to study about constructors. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new package for it and name it as constructors. And let's say in this, I'm going to create a new class. It could be any class. I'll name it as, let's say, students, and check this main method. So if I talk about what constructors are, let me increase the font size. So constructors have same name as of the class name. So if the class name is students, we're gonna have a similar name that is as a class name. So this is like a constructor. So this will be called automatically as soon as you create an object of a object of this class, right? And constructors are basically used to initialize instance variable of the class at the time of object creation. So constructors can have access modifiers as well. I can even write public, I can even write a private constructor, right? So let's get started with public, and whatever that I'm gonna write over here. So this will be called whenever we create an object of students class. So we need not to explicitly call it like we call other methods of a class, because I mean, this is actually not a method. This will not gonna have any return type. Constructors, they don't have return type. If I add a return type over here, it will not gonna throw any error. But if I add a return type, then this will gonna act like a method. So this will now be a simple void method, and in order to call this method, we need to create an object first, and then using the reference of that object, we need to call this method. Otherwise, if I don't give a return type, and if I print something inside it, let's say I'm gonna write calling constructor, and as soon as we create an object of this class, so if I say students st equal to new students, and if I run this, so the very first thing that will be called automatically is the constructor of this class. Now, as I said, we can make this constructor as private as well. So if I make this constructor as private and if I run this, this will still gonna work for this class. But when we are accessing the object of this class into a different class, we'll not be able to create an object of this class. So private means that this is only accessible within this class. And still, if the constructor is private and you want to access it in a different class, so that can also be done, but that has to be done with the help of some methods. And for that approach, we need to follow some getter and setter, and this is one of the approach that we're gonna see it in the singleton pattern as well. So if you go a little down in the course after a few lectures, you're gonna see that I've explained one example of double equals and dot equals with the help of a singleton design pattern. So there you're gonna see that we have actually created a private constructor, right? So this is what I mean. Constructors can also have access modifiers. I mean, for example, let's say what I'm talking about is, let's say there's a class, another class test, and this test class, the constructor of this class is private. So I'm gonna say private test. And now if I create an object of this class over here, let's say I'm gonna write test equal to new test, it will immediately gonna throw a compile time error, and you can see it is asking to change the visibility of this test. So this constructor is not visible actually. If I change this to public, then I should be able to see it without any errors, right? So this is why, I mean, if we create a public private constructor, so that will be private to this particular class only, and it should not be accessible to any other class. So any other class should not able to create the object of that class. All right. Now, if I talk about different types of constructor, so we have generally default constructor, we have a parameterized constructor, and we also have a no argument constructor. So default constructor is basically like whenever there is no constructor created explicitly, JVM creates its own default constructor when you create an object of this class, right? So I mean, if we have already defined a constructor over here which is like a non-argument constructor or a parameterized constructor, then the default constructor will not be created. Then JVM will not gonna create a default constructor on its own, right? So the if there is no constructor available in the class explicitly, then JVM creates its own default constructor. Also, the structure of this default constructor and no argument constructor is same, right? But this is no argument constructor is basically without any arguments, and this is a user defined constructor. This is what user has created. And default constructor, again, there is no argument. So the structure is also the similar, but it is by default created by JVM, right? It's not a user defined constructor. So at times in interviews, it may be asked that how many types of constructors are there. So there are three types of constructors. One is default constructor, no argument constructor, and one is the parameterized constructor. Now, if I talk about parameterized constructor, so again, we'll have the same name. And then like I can define some parameters, or I'll first comment out this, and I'll define some arguments over here. I'll say student name and string roll number, right? And I'll define some variables over here where I'll say string student name and string roll number, right? So what I'm gonna do, see, as soon as I save this, you can see we are getting some errors. So errors we're gonna get over here. Now the default constructor will not be called. Now the argumented constructor will be called. So these arguments we need to pass over here. These parameters we need to pass over here. So there are two parameters. One is the student name and one is the roll number. So let's say student name, I'm gonna pass it as Rahul, and roll number I'm gonna pass it as 101. And as soon as I pass it, so this should be in the form of int. So as soon as I pass it, you can see the errors are gone. Now we need to like what I'll do, I'm gonna print st dot roll number, and in the next statement I'm gonna print first I'm gonna print the name, st dot student name, and st dot roll number, right? But what I need to do, whatever values that we are passing it to the constructor, we need to assign these values to these global variables. So how I can do it, I can simply say st name equal to student name and roll number equal to roll number. So when this should be int numeric as well. So when I run this, it will gonna print these values, right? So but most of the time when we are creating variables over here which are assigned to the same variable names over here, so we should keep a practice that this naming convention should remain same. So if I give student name over here. So in the argument student name, the same name has to be for the global variable name. Although it will not going to throw any error if I keep a separate name and then assign the values, but this is a better practice how people are actually doing in the industry. We actually keep the same name. But if I keep a same name over here, like if I want to call the global variable, then this is a local variable and this is a global variable. So in order to call a global variable, you need to use a keyword called as this. So we're going to say this dot, and this will refer to the global variable, and then this dot roll number should refer to the global roll number variable, and then the value that came to this that comes to this argument we're gonna pass over here. So whenever we create an object, so we just change the name, so we're gonna rename it over here as well, right? So these values will be assigned to the global variables, and then you're calling the global variables over here. So if I run this now, we're gonna get the same output. Now this is what we have looked so far, like constructors, declaration and use. Constructor are nothing but the code which gets executed whenever a class is instantiated, right? Whenever we create an object of class. So declaration of a constructor must use the name as of class name only. There should not be any other name given to that constructor, right? And the constructor must not contain any return type. There should not be void int any other return type, otherwise it will gonna become a method. And the main use of constructor is to initialize the variables, like we have already seen. With the help of this keyword, we are initializing the global variables on the runtime. And there are default constructor, there are no argument constructor, there are argumented parameterized constructor. So the default constructor is a no argument constructor, right? For example, over here you can see for a dog class, this is a dog constructor, right? So the compiler provides a default constructor only when no constructor is provided by the end user or by the programmer, right? So next we're going to look at the constructor overloading part. The constructors can also be overloaded like we do method overloading. Now in constructor overloading, it's like I can have the same constructor, I mean the same name but without any argument. So this is what constructor overloading is, right? So whenever you create an object of students class, you can either provide two parameters over here, or you can keep this without any parameter, right? So if you keep it without any parameter, then this constructor will be called. If you are creating an object with two parameters, then this constructor will be called, right? So if I run this, you'll see at the end it should actually gonna print calling constructor, right? So whenever you create a constructor, whenever you create an object with two parameters, then the argumented constructor will be called, parameterized constructor will be called, right? And whenever you are not creating not giving any parameters over here, then the default the no argumented constructor will be called, right? So this is not printing anything because printing thing we are doing it over here, right? So now we can call a constructor within the constructor as well. Like in case of method, at times we need to call a method within a method. So same way, if I want to call the students constructor inside this, I can call it. So one of the ways I can simply say new students, right? But here what I'm doing, I'm creating another object. Although if I comment out this part for the time being, and if I run this, you're gonna see that first calling constructor and this will be called. right? But it's not actually done like this way. In order to call a constructor within the constructor, you can simply use this over here. So if I run this, you're gonna see this is called. And if we have, let's say if I create one more argumented constructor, and maybe I'll pass on int I over here, and print the value of I, uh, something like this. So if in case we want to call this over here, so instead of this I can write this I need to give some value, right? So if I run this, then this is how we can call constructor within the constructor. This is also called as constructor chaining, right? Although you'll hardly find this practically used anywhere, but yeah, there is a concept. So we must be knowing that we can call constructor within the constructor. We can form a constructor chaining as well. All right. So this is what we just studied, like how we can do overloading in case of constructor, and what is constructor chaining as well. So in the next example, we're gonna take a look at like around the super keyword. So super keyword can be used with the methods, as well as can be used in the constructor. So how we're gonna use the super keyword with constructor or methods, and why, like what is the benefit of using super keyword? So that is what we're gonna look in the next lecture. Thank you.